The day Evelyn first saw the ad for the tiny house, she had no idea it would change everything. It was one of those rare moments where time seemed to slow down, and she couldn't look away. The headline was bold, practically begging for attention. $500 tiny house must sell immediately. Below it was a simple description, but the words were enough to get her heart racing. Fixer-upper. Needs a lot of work, but potential is massive. At first, Evelyn thought it had to be a mistake. There was no way a house, no matter how small, could be sold for so little. Even if it was in bad shape, a home was still a home. But as she stared at the ad, her mind started to wander. She wasn't in a position to buy something fancy or new. A modest, tiny house seemed like a dream come true. Evelyn had always been drawn to the idea of a small, cozy home. Ever since she moved to the area to teach at the local high school, she'd struggled to make ends meet. She rented a small apartment in town, but it was cramped, the walls thin, and she could hear her neighbors arguing every night. She wasn't complaining. It was just that her dream of having her own place seemed out of reach. So when she saw the ad for the tiny house, it felt like a glimmer of hope. She clicked on the link and found a photo of the house. It was small, but it had character. There was no denying that. The house was painted a faded blue, with a small porch and a set of old wooden steps. The yard around it was overgrown with grass and weeds, but Evelyn could already picture herself sitting on that porch in the mornings, enjoying a hot cup of coffee while the sun rose. It felt right, but there was something that bothered her. The location. The house was way out in the woods, near a small town she didn't know much about. It was a good distance from the city, and the only neighbors were farms and people who had probably lived there for decades. Evelyn had never been one to shy away from a challenge, but this would be a big step. She tried to shake off her worries, reminding herself that it was only $500. Sure, there was no way she'd be able to afford to fix it up anytime soon, but she could do what she always did, take things one step at a time. Besides, $500 was almost nothing compared to what most houses cost. She was always careful with money, but this felt like the kind of gamble worth taking. With a nervous breath, Evelyn called the number listed in the ad. It rang a few times before someone picked up. "Hello?" a gruff voice answered. "Hi, I saw your ad about the tiny house. Is it still available?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm even though her heart was pounding. "Yeah, it's still here. You want to come take a look at it?" Evelyn hesitated for a moment. It wasn't like she could just drop everything and drive out there immediately. "Can you tell me a little more about it?" she asked instead. The man gave her a quick rundown. It was an old house, probably built decades ago. There had been no major repairs in years, and the roof leaked in places. The walls were peeling, and there was a lot of wood rot, especially around the windows. The guy who said his name was Charlie was upfront about it. He didn't sugarcoat things, but then he added something that caught her attention. "Look, the house is free for anyone who's willing to take it off my hands. I just need someone to come and get it. I can't afford to fix it, and the land it's on is getting sold." It was clear he wasn't trying to make a sale. He just wanted to get rid of it. He'd inherited the property from a relative and had no use for it. Evelyn didn't need much more convincing. It was the perfect chance. She told him she would come out to see it the next day. The drive to the tiny house was longer than Evelyn expected, the narrow roads winding through dense woods, with only a few scattered houses along the way. By the time she reached the property, it was late afternoon, and the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow over everything. The house, though small, stood in front of her like a little beacon. It looked even older in person, but there was something about it that called to her. Despite the worn exterior and overgrown yard, she could see the potential. Charlie met her by the gate. He was an older man, probably in his late 60s, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. He looked exactly how she'd imagined someone who owned an old house like this might look. A little rough around the edges, but kind-hearted. "Here it is," he said, waving a hand toward the house. "Like I said, it's going to take a lot of work, but it's yours if you want it." Evelyn walked up the steps, her boots crunching on the dry leaves. The door creaked open, revealing a small living room with a low ceiling and hardwood floors that had seen better days. Dust particles floated in the sunlight that streamed through the cracked windows. The air smelled musty, a mix of mildew and old wood. Charlie led her through the house, showing her where the walls had caved in, where the floor was rotting, and where the plumbing was almost completely shot. But there was something she couldn't shake, the way the house felt. Even with its flaws, it was full of history. It had stories to tell, and Evelyn could almost hear them in the silence of the empty rooms. "Are you sure it's all right to take it?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "Yeah," Charlie said. "I've got no use for it, and the people buying the land are just going to tear it down if no one takes it. The house isn't worth much, but if you're willing to put in the work, it could be yours." Evelyn stood there for a long moment, her eyes scanning the house. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but she knew it was the kind of place she could make her own. She thought about her little apartment in town, how crowded it always felt, how disconnected she was from the world outside. This house, even in its dilapidated state, promised something more: peace, solitude, a place to truly call home. "I'll take it," she said finally, a sense of relief washing over her. Charlie nodded, as if he'd known all along that she would. "All right. We'll need to get some paperwork done, but that's about it. I'll leave you to it." He gave her a smile, turned, and walked back to his truck. Evelyn stayed behind, standing in the doorway and looking out over the yard. The sun was nearly gone, and the shadows were growing longer. In that moment, she felt something stir within her. Hope, maybe, or the beginnings of excitement. There was so much work ahead of her, but this tiny house represented something bigger. It was a chance to start fresh, a chance to build something new from the ground up. Evelyn spent the next few weeks preparing for the move. She rented a truck and found a place to park the house, an empty corner of her cousin's farm about an hour away. It wasn't much, but it was far enough from the city to give her space to breathe. The move was a challenge. There were moments when she wasn't sure the house would make it to its new spot without falling apart. But somehow it did. And when the house finally settled on its new foundation, Evelyn knew that she had made the right decision. The house was hers now, in all its broken, beautiful glory. And while there was a lot of work to do, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, the promise of something better on the horizon. The sun had barely risen the next day when Evelyn stepped into the tiny house to begin her work. The light filtered through the dusty windows, casting long shadows on the walls, which had begun to feel like her own personal canvas. The space was small, barely bigger than a garden shed, but Evelyn loved it. It felt like a secret world all her own, tucked away from the rush of life. The first thing she noticed when she walked inside was the silence. The kind of silence that only comes in a place left undisturbed for years. The house had been abandoned for who knew how long, and it felt as if time had simply paused here. Evelyn had never been someone who liked loud noises or distractions, and here, in this little house, it was as if she had found a place to breathe, away from the world's constant demands. She set her toolbox down on the floor and began to take stock of the damage. The living room, which had once been the heart of the house, was now a shadow of what it had been. The wooden floors were warped in places, and some of the planks were missing altogether. The walls were covered in peeling paint, and in a few spots, water stains made the room look as if it had been caught in a storm it couldn't escape from. But Evelyn wasn't daunted by the damage. She had a talent for seeing potential, for looking past what was broken and imagining what it could be. As a teacher, she'd always tried to help her students see the good in things, to look beyond the surface and find beauty in the simplest moments. This house, she thought, was no different. Her first task was to clean. She started in the kitchen, where the counters were covered in dust and grime. The sink, rusty and chipped, seemed to sigh in relief when she ran some warm water over it. As she scrubbed, Evelyn couldn't help but think about the people who had lived here before. Who had cooked in this kitchen? Who had sat at the tiny dining table, sharing meals and stories? There was something comforting about the idea of continuing that tradition, even if the house was now a little worse for wear. After a few hours of cleaning, Evelyn moved on to the next task, removing the old wallpaper from the walls. It was slow work, and the paper came off in strips, revealing layers of old paint beneath it. She discovered a few different colors, each one a reminder of a different time in the house's life. The house had been through a lot, but it had survived, and Evelyn admired its strength. As she worked, she found herself thinking more about the house's history. There was so much she didn't know, about the people who had lived here, about why it had been abandoned, and about how it had ended up in her hands. It was a mystery that tugged at her curiosity, and the more she uncovered, the more she wanted to know. Later that evening, as she took a break and sat on the porch, a thought crossed her mind. What if the house had more secrets to reveal? The idea made her heart race. She had never been one to believe in things like ghosts or hidden treasures, but something about this house made her wonder. Perhaps it was the quiet, the history, or the feeling that there was something just out of sight. Evelyn shook her head, dismissing the thought as silly. After all, this was just an old house. It wasn't magical, or was it? The following days passed in a blur of work. Evelyn focused on the repairs, tackling each task one by one. She fixed the plumbing, patched up the roof, and started painting the walls a soft shade of green, the color of new growth. It wasn't a fancy color, but it made the space feel lighter, fresher, and more welcoming. Every time she stepped back to admire her work, she felt a sense of accomplishment. But despite the progress, there was always something on the back of her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this house than met the eye. It wasn't just the house itself. It was the way it made her feel. Every time she worked in one of the rooms, she felt like she was uncovering a little piece of its story, like it was trying to tell her something. One afternoon, as she was working in the living room, Evelyn noticed something strange. There was a part of the floor that seemed off, like it didn't quite match the rest of the wood. She knelt down and ran her fingers along the edges, noticing a small gap between the boards. She pressed down gently, and to her surprise, the floor gave way slightly, revealing a hidden compartment underneath. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened it. Inside was an old metal box, its surface worn and scratched with age. It was about the size of a shoebox, and it had a faded lock on it. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she touched the box, the air around her feeling suddenly thick with anticipation. What was this? She hesitated for a moment, wondering if she should open it. Her curiosity won out. She carefully pried the lock open with a screwdriver, her mind racing with possibilities. Inside the box, wrapped in a piece of faded cloth, were several items. A handful of old photographs, a few pages of handwritten notes, and what looked like a small, tarnished piece of jewelry. Evelyn's hands shook as she unfolded the cloth. The photographs were black and white, some of them showing a woman standing in front of the house. She looked familiar in some way, though Evelyn couldn't place her. There was something in the woman's eyes, a hint of mystery, as though she held a secret that no one could uncover. Alongside the photographs, there was a letter. The handwriting was elegant, though some of the words had faded over time. Evelyn carefully read it, trying to make sense of the words. It was a letter from someone named Margaret, dated more than 70 years ago. The letter mentioned something about an inheritance, but it was unclear what exactly had been left behind. It spoke of a promise that one day someone would find what had been hidden. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest as she looked at the letter. It was as if she had stumbled upon something important, something that had been tucked away for decades, just waiting to be discovered. But what did it mean? What was hidden? The question lingered in the air like a puzzle waiting to be solved. She picked up the small piece of jewelry, a tarnished locket that had once been shiny, but was now worn with age. Inside it was a picture, though the glass was clouded and the image hard to make out. Evelyn held it up to the light, squinting to see if she could recognize the faces. They looked like they belonged to a different time, a different world. For the next few hours, Evelyn sat in the living room, surrounded by the photographs and letter, trying to piece together the mystery. Who was Margaret, and why had she left this treasure hidden away in the floorboards? Evelyn's mind raced with possibilities. She had always loved history, and this discovery felt like she was stepping into a story that was bigger than herself. The tiny house, it seemed, had a secret to share, and Evelyn was determined to uncover it. As evening settled over the house, Evelyn put the box away and leaned back in her chair. The house felt different now, charged with a new energy. What had started as a simple project to fix up a tiny, run-down house had turned into something far more complicated and far more exciting. There was a story here, and Evelyn wasn't about to let it slip away. The tiny house, once just a small, forgotten structure, now held the key to a mystery she couldn't resist. And so, as the night stretched on, Evelyn felt the weight of the past settle around her. She knew that the journey ahead would be more than just about fixing up a house. It would be about discovering the history hidden in its walls. And for the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt like she had a purpose, something to chase, something worth finding. Evelyn could hardly sleep that night. The discovery in the floorboards kept swirling in her mind like a whirlpool she couldn't escape. What had Margaret hidden? And why had she left that letter? Who had she been? Questions piled up faster than Evelyn could sort through them. The next morning, she woke early as usual. The sun was just starting to spill over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the tiny house. Despite the excitement still buzzing inside her, she knew she had to be patient. This wasn't a puzzle that would be solved in one day. There were pieces missing, and she needed to figure out where to start. Evelyn made her way to the kitchen where the box sat on the table. She ran her fingers over the tarnished locket again, lost in thought. The photos, though faded and worn, had become her guide. But they didn't tell the full story. She had a sense that the answers were out there. She just had to find them. The letter she had found was her first real lead. It mentioned an inheritance, but the wording was vague, almost like a riddle. What had Margaret meant by hidden? And why had it been locked away in the floor of the tiny house? It made Evelyn wonder what kind of person Margaret had been. Had she been hiding something? Or was she simply protecting something valuable to her? For now, Evelyn needed to gather more information. She decided to start with the photos. One of them, a black and white image of a woman standing in front of the tiny house, caught her eye. The woman in the photo looked almost the same age as Margaret in the letter, but there was no way to be sure. She studied the photograph carefully, hoping something would jump out at her. The house in the background looked much different. The porch was wider and the yard wasn't overgrown with weeds. The building seemed newer, cared for. She could almost feel the weight of history in that single picture. Evelyn knew she needed help. She had no idea who Margaret was, but there had to be someone who did. She had been living in the area for over a year now, but there were still many things she didn't know. The tiny house, though small and tucked away in the woods, seemed to hold secrets that had been buried long before she arrived. It was time to visit the local historian. The small town wasn't far, just a 20-minute drive down winding country roads. Evelyn knew the place well, though she had only visited a few times. The town felt like it was stuck in time. Old brick buildings, a few small shops, and the kind of quiet you don't find in bigger cities. It had a charm that seemed to pull you in. The local historian, Mrs. Wilson, ran the small museum near the town center. It was an old building, full of dusty exhibits and antique photographs. Evelyn had passed it many times, but today, she was determined to find out what she could about the house and its previous owner. Mrs. Wilson was a small, older woman with a gentle smile and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She was sitting at the front desk of the museum when Evelyn walked in, a stack of papers in front of her. "Good morning," Evelyn greeted her. "I was wondering if you could help me. I recently bought a small house out in the woods and I found something strange there. I was hoping you might know something about the house's history." Mrs. Wilson looked up from her papers, intrigued. "What house is that?" Evelyn hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should mention the hidden box and the letter just yet. But Mrs. Wilson's friendly demeanor made her feel like she could trust her. "It's an old tiny house near the edge of town. I've been fixing it up and I found some things that made me curious." "Old photographs, a letter, things like that?" The historian's eyes twinkled. "Oh, you must mean the Langley house." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. "Langley? Is that the name of the person who lived there?" "Yes," Mrs. Wilson said, leaning forward in her chair. "The Langley family lived there many, many years ago. They were reclusive folks, not much known about them. But I've heard stories. You see, the Langleys were a bit of a mystery around here. There were rumors that they'd hidden a fortune, but no one knew for sure." Evelyn's mind raced. Could Margaret Langley have been the one to leave the items in the house? And what about the hidden treasure? Could that be what the letter referred to? She felt like she was holding a key to a story that had been locked away for years. "Do you know where I can learn more about the Langleys?" Evelyn asked. Mrs. Wilson stood up and walked over to a shelf full of old records. She pulled out a thick binder and opened it to a page with several faded photographs. One of the pictures was of a woman who looked strikingly familiar. Evelyn could feel her pulse quicken as she stared at the woman's face. "This is Margaret Langley," Mrs. Wilson said, pointing to the photograph. She was the last of the Langley family to live in that house. She disappeared around the 1950s, and no one really knew what happened to her. Some people said she left to start a new life, but others think she may have been hiding something. Evelyn leaned in closer to study the photograph. Margaret's face was soft and kind, but there was a hint of something else in her eyes. It was the same look Evelyn had noticed in the photos she had found in the tiny house. It was as if Margaret knew something that no one else could know, something that made her different from the rest of the world. "Do you know what happened to her after she disappeared?" Evelyn asked. Mrs. Wilson shook her head. "It's a mystery. Some say she left in a hurry, taking only a few things with her. Others think she died under strange circumstances, but there's no real evidence to back that up. The house was left empty for many years after she vanished. Evelyn's mind was spinning. Was it possible that Margaret had hidden something of value in the house before she left? If the rumors were true, the house could hold more than just memories. It could hold treasure. But why had she kept it a secret? And why had she left the clues in the floorboards for someone to find? Is there anyone who might know more about the Langley family? Evelyn asked, still hoping for more information. Mrs. Wilson thought for a moment. You might want to try talking to Mr. Harris. He's one of the oldest people in town and remembers the Langleys from when they were still around. He lives just down the road in the big farmhouse. He's a bit of a recluse, but if anyone knows anything, it's him. Evelyn thanked Mrs. Wilson for her help and left the museum with a new sense of purpose. The mystery was deepening, and Evelyn was more determined than ever to uncover the truth. She drove to Mr. Harris's farmhouse, her mind racing with questions. Could he be the missing link in this puzzle? Would he know something that could finally lead her to the hidden treasure? When she arrived at the farmhouse, it looked just as she had imagined, old, weathered, and full of stories. She knocked on the door, and after a few moments, it creaked open. A man in his late 80s stood in the doorway. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp despite his age. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice gravelly but kind. Evelyn introduced herself and explained why she was there. Mr. Harris seemed to study her for a long moment, then stepped aside to let her in. As she sat down in his living room, Evelyn couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. Mr. Harris knew something, she could feel it in the air. She just had to get him to share it. "I've been trying to learn about Margaret Langley," Evelyn began. "I bought her old house and I found some things there that made me wonder if there's more to the story. Do you know anything about her?" Mr. Harris's eyes flickered for a moment and then he nodded slowly. "I knew Margaret well. She was a quiet woman, kept to herself. But she wasn't always that way. She used to come into town now and then before she disappeared." Evelyn leaned in, eager to hear more. "What happened to her? Where did she go?" Mr. Harris sighed deeply. "The truth is, no one really knows. But there were rumors about treasure hidden in that house. Some said she left it behind, others think she took it with her. No one ever found out for sure." Evelyn's heart raced. The pieces were starting to fit together. The house had more to offer than she had ever imagined. And with every step she took, the mystery grew more compelling. Evelyn could feel her heart racing as Mr. Harris's words hung in the air. The mention of treasure hidden away in the house all these years made her pulse quicken. She had already found so many clues, photographs, a letter, a locket. But what if the treasure was real? What if Margaret Langley had really hidden something of value in the house before disappearing? It was hard to believe, yet everything seemed to point in that direction. The more Evelyn thought about it, the more the idea of treasure made sense. Margaret had been secretive, almost protective of her house, and from what Mr. Harris had said, she had been very private about her life. She had kept to herself, and no one in town had truly known her. Yet there had always been whispers about something hidden away. Now Evelyn was the one with the key to unlock that mystery. "How do you know all this?" Evelyn asked, leaning forward. "You said there were rumors." "What kind of rumors?" Mr. Harris rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Well, like I said, no one knew for sure. But people would talk. Some said Margaret had inherited a fortune. Others said she'd been saving up for something, maybe a big move or a new life. But the most interesting part was the house itself. People said the Langleys had hidden things in the walls, under the floors, in secret compartments. It wasn't just a house to them, it was a vault, a place of protection. Evelyn felt a chill run through her. The secret compartments. She had already found one herself, hidden under the floorboards with the metal box inside. She hadn't yet opened the box fully. What if it contained the answers she was looking for? What if it had more clues that would lead her to the treasure? She stood up abruptly. "I have to go back to the house." Mr. Harris looked at her with a knowing expression. "You've already found something, haven't you?" Evelyn nodded. "Yes, but I need to know more. I have to go back and see if there's something I missed." "Be careful," he warned, his voice suddenly serious. "There are things about that house, things you might not be ready for. Margaret wasn't just hiding treasure, you know. She was hiding something bigger, something that could change everything." Evelyn felt a shiver run down her spine, but she didn't let it stop her. She thanked Mr. Harris and left the farmhouse with a renewed sense of purpose. The mystery was deeper than she had imagined, but now she felt more determined than ever to get to the bottom of it. When she arrived back at the tiny house, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the yard. It was a quiet evening, with no sound except for the rustling of the trees in the wind. Evelyn stepped inside, her boots clicking softly on the wooden floor. The house, though still dusty and in need of repairs, felt different now. It no longer felt like an abandoned building, it felt like a living, breathing thing. It had secrets, and it was waiting for her to uncover them. She walked into the living room where she had left the box. It was still sitting on the table just as she had left it, but now it seemed even more mysterious. The faded cloth wrapped around it seemed to hold a weight all its own. She took a deep breath and gently unwrapped it, revealing the metal box again. Her hands trembled as she held it, but this time there was no hesitation. She needed to know what was inside. The box had a small latch which she easily opened. Inside, the first thing she saw was a stack of old papers. There were more photographs and a few handwritten notes yellowed with age. She carefully picked up the top photo, studying it closely. It showed a group of people standing in front of the house, but the image was much older than the other ones she had found. The people in the photo were dressed in clothes from the 1920s, and they all had somber expressions on their faces. One of the people in the photograph caught her eye, an older man standing off to the side. He looked familiar, though she couldn't place him. His face seemed hard, his eyes cold and distant. She stared at the photo for a long time, feeling a strange sense of unease. Who was he? And why was he in the box with the other photographs? She flipped the photo over, hoping to find a name or clue. There was only one word, written in faded ink. Richard. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Richard. That was the name from the letter Margaret had written. The letter that mentioned an inheritance and a promise. Could this man be the key to the mystery? The connection between the house, the treasure, and Margaret's disappearance was becoming clearer. But it still didn't make sense. Next, Evelyn turned her attention to the other papers in the box. The top sheet was a letter, written in the same elegant handwriting as the note she had already read. She unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the words. Dearest Margaret, I have placed it where no one will find it, just as we agreed. It is a secret that only you and I will ever know. If the time comes and you need it, it will be waiting for you. Do not share it with anyone, not even your closest friends. The treasure is for you and you alone. With love, Richard. Evelyn's mind whirled as she read the letter. It was clear that Richard and Margaret had been involved in something together, something that involved hiding something precious. But what was it? And why had Richard gone to such lengths to keep it a secret? Evelyn sat back in the chair, staring at the letter in her hands. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her. She had uncovered something big, something important, but there were still so many unanswered questions. What had Richard hidden in the house? Where was it? And why had Margaret gone to such lengths to protect it? It was clear that the treasure wasn't just money or jewelry. It was something much more valuable. Something that had meant everything to Margaret and Richard. But what was it? The next morning, Evelyn decided to visit the local library. She needed more information about Richard, who he was and how he was connected to Margaret. The small-town library was tucked away at the end of a quiet street, its brick walls weathered and worn with time. Inside, the smell of old books filled the air. Evelyn walked to the back where the local history section was and began to flip through dusty old records. After an hour of searching, she found what she was looking for. Richard Langley was listed as the brother of Margaret. They had both grown up in the area, but Richard had left home when he was young, heading off to the city. No one knew much about him after that. He had never returned, and the family had lost contact with him. The last mention of him in the records was from the late 1930s, and after that, he seemed to disappear from history altogether. But the more Evelyn thought about it, the more she realized that Richard's disappearance was part of the puzzle. Why had he left? And why had he kept in contact with Margaret only through these secret letters? What had they been protecting all those years? Evelyn couldn't help but wonder if Richard's disappearance and Margaret's secrecy were connected. Was it possible that Richard had been hiding something too? Something that had forced him to leave? Or had Margaret kept her distance from everyone, including her brother, because of the dangerous secret they shared? The more Evelyn dug, the deeper the mystery became. But she was determined to find the answers. The tiny house had become a symbol of something much larger, something she couldn't yet understand. It held a story, a secret, and Evelyn was the one chosen to uncover it. Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that the last pieces of the puzzle were just within her reach. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became that the story she was unraveling was more than just about treasure. It was about family secrets, trust, and choices made long ago. The discovery of the letter from Richard to Margaret had opened a floodgate of possibilities, but it hadn't answered her most pressing question. What had Margaret and Richard been hiding all these years? As she sat at the small wooden table in the tiny house, Evelyn sifted through the pile of papers and photographs again, hoping something would jump out at her. Her mind was racing, piecing together fragments of history, fragments that didn't seem to fit together yet. Margaret's letter, the mysterious photo of Richard, the whispered rumors of treasure, it was all connected. But to what? She needed to go back to the house. The one thing she hadn't explored fully was the attic. She'd heard from Mr. Harris that the house had once been full of hidden compartments, and the attic could hold more secrets than she realized. It had been years since anyone had lived there full-time, but Evelyn had felt a strange connection to the space, like it was calling to her. There had to be something important up there. The climb up the narrow staircase to the attic felt almost ritualistic. The old wood creaked under her feet, and the air grew cooler as she ascended. The attic was dark and filled with old furniture covered in white sheets. Dust floated lazily in the air, and the smell of aged wood filled her nostrils. It was as if the house had been waiting, holding its breath for her to arrive. She stepped forward, letting her eyes adjust to the gloom. As she began to poke around, she noticed that many of the items in the attic were covered in cobwebs, giving them an eerie feel. There were boxes filled with forgotten knickknacks, trunks full of old clothes and old wooden crates. Evelyn's heart thudded in her chest. She wasn't sure why, but she felt drawn to one of the crates in the corner. It was smaller than the others, almost like it didn't belong with the rest. She walked toward it slowly, her breath quickening with each step. The crate had no lock, but it was heavy, and there was a feeling of weight inside it. As she pried the lid open, her eyes widened. Inside the crate, covered in an old faded blanket, was another box. This one small, wooden, and intricately carved. It had a design that looked like a tree, its branches winding and twisting around the edges. It was beautiful, but it was also heavy with history, as if it had been waiting for someone to discover it. With shaking hands, Evelyn lifted the box out of the crate and set it carefully on the floor. There was something about it that felt different from the other items in the house. It wasn't just another piece of forgotten furniture. It was something that held meaning. Something important. As she opened the box, the first thing she saw was a set of keys, several, each one different in shape and size. Beneath them was a small leather-bound journal. Evelyn's fingers brushed over the journal's worn cover before she carefully opened it. The pages were yellowed, but the handwriting was still clear. The first page read, "To Margaret, I hope this journal serves you well. It is filled with secrets that only you and I should know. May it guide you in the future, and may you find the peace that I was never able to. The keys will unlock everything. Do not forget the past is never truly gone, it only waits to be remembered." Evelyn's heart raced as she read the words. It was clear that this journal was meant for Margaret. The keys, the secrets. It all made sense now. But what did the keys open? She looked back at the box, now filled with a sense of purpose. These were the final pieces she had been searching for. The journal and the keys were the last clues to unlocking Margaret's story. But where were the locks? Where did these keys fit? Evelyn closed the box gently and tucked it under her arm. She knew she had to return to the town's library. The history records had mentioned nothing about the keys or the journal, but perhaps there were other pieces to the puzzle hidden there. She felt an undeniable pull to the library, like it held the final answers she needed. When she arrived, the library was quieter than usual, and the librarian greeted her with a curious glance. Evelyn went straight to the local history section, scanning the shelves for anything that could help her understand the significance of the journal and the keys. She pulled down another dusty volume, this one filled with old maps and town records. Flipping through the pages, she paused at a map that looked strange. It wasn't a regular town map. It was a drawing of the surrounding area, with symbols marking specific locations. Evelyn traced the path on the map with her finger, noticing a series of strange markings near the edge of the woods where her house stood. There, hidden between the lines of roads and trails, was a small symbol, an intricate design that matched the carving on the box she had found in the attic. The symbol was a tree just like the one on the box. Evelyn's stomach tightened with excitement. The map showed the area in great detail, and the symbol marked a place near the old barn behind her house. It was a place she hadn't thought to search before. Evelyn felt the weight of her discovery settle over her. The keys, the journal, the map, everything pointed to that spot behind her house. She didn't waste another moment. She hurried back to the tiny house, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to see this place for herself. By the time she reached the barn, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the yard. The barn was old and weathered, but there was something different about it now. Evelyn could feel the air growing heavier, as though the ground beneath her feet was holding its breath. She walked around the barn, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of the symbol, and then near the back corner she saw it. There, partially hidden by overgrown ivy and moss, was a small stone slab. The symbol she had seen on the map was carved into its surface, almost as if it had been placed there deliberately. It seemed to fit perfectly with the other discoveries she had made: the keys, the box, the journal. It all led her here. Evelyn crouched down, brushing away the moss and dirt. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the keys in her pocket. The smallest key in the set seemed to fit the indentation on the stone perfectly. With a small twist, the slab shifted, revealing a narrow staircase that led down into the earth. The air was cool and musty as she descended the stairs. She could barely see, but the faint glow from the fading light above her illuminated the stone walls. The staircase seemed to go on forever, twisting deeper into the earth. When she reached the bottom, she found herself in a small, dimly lit chamber. The walls were lined with shelves, and in the center of the room was a wooden chest, old and weathered, but still intact. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The treasure hidden all these years was right in front of her. She walked slowly toward the chest, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The chest was locked, but the keys she had found earlier would surely open it. She inserted one of the larger keys into the lock, and with a soft click, the chest creaked open. Inside, there were piles of old documents, a few dusty trinkets, and a collection of gold coins. Real treasure. But it wasn't the gold that caught Evelyn's eye. At the very top of the pile was a small, intricately carved box, exactly like the one she had found earlier, only much older. She opened it carefully, revealing a single photograph. It was a picture of Margaret and Richard standing together in front of the house. They were smiling, their arms around each other, with the same symbol of the tree etched into the ground beside them. Evelyn understood then. The treasure wasn't just the gold or the trinkets, it was the story of Margaret and Richard, their bond, their secrets, and their love for each other. They had hidden everything away, protecting it from the world, and now Evelyn was the one entrusted with their story.